Hello, souls and demons, and welcome back. Today's story is called Infectious, written by getyaisha. So sit back, grip your seats, and enjoy. My name is Oscar, and I was a waiter at Prime Steaks. It's a steakhouse if you couldn't tell by the name. I'm telling you this because, as far as I know, that's where all this started. It was a normal Wednesday night. No one was coming in, and we were about an hour from closing time. And I was wiping down the tables. Justine passed through the room talking to Callie, the other waitress, while Pete was out back sneaking a smoke. Just as I dropped my rag into the bucket, the phone rang at the greeter's desk. Justine put her head down and let out a disgusted sigh as she made her way over to the phone. "Prime Steaks, how may I help you?" There was a long pause before the voice on the other end finally spoke. "I would like to make a reservation for 13. I know you guys are close to closing for the night, but I'll pay double and tip the staff $100 each, if you can make this happen for me." Justine put the man on hold and asked if we wanted to make the money, and of course everyone agreed. 30 minutes later, 2 black shuttle buses pulled into the lot. A tall, thin man got out of the first one and came in, stopping just inside the door. He looked around the room for a second before speaking. "I'm Alan Prescott. I called for the reservation. How many people are on staff tonight?" he asked as he dug a roll of $100 bills out of his pocket. Justine smiled and told him there were 4 of us, and he promptly peeled off 4 crisp $100 bills and handed them over. After that, he stepped back outside and waved to the vans. A few minutes later, the place was alive with conversation. There were 6 men and 6 women, not including Mr. Prescott himself. Once they were all seated and done ordering, Prescott stood in the middle of the room, raising a glass of red wine and clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are all invited here tonight for a very special reason. Everyone in this room has done a lot for the company this year, and I wanted to personally thank you all." He paused and took a long sip of his wine, then sat the glass on the table. As he did, his hands began to shake, and his eyes rolled over white before he collapsed. Callie was closest to him, so she immediately began trying to help. While she was giving him mouth-to-mouth, Mr. Prescott let out an award-winning belch directly into Callie's mouth, and she puked all over him. I don't know if it was Callie's vomit or Prescott's breath, but the room suddenly reeked of rotten eggs and ammonia. Some of the other customers rushed over to help, but the second they got close to him, they got sick as well. Not wanting to get sick, I grabbed my phone and went to the kitchen, dialing 911. 911, please state the nature of your emergency. "My name is Oscar. I'm a waiter at Prime Steaks on Perry Road. A man just passed out in our dining area, and now people are getting sick. Can you please send an ambulance?" By the time the EMTs got there, all hell had broken loose. Everybody in the dining hall was now puking their guts out. Some made it to the restrooms, others weren't so lucky. Pete and I stayed in the kitchen and, for some reason, weren't affected by whatever was going on. Callie, on the other hand, was at ground zero when EMTs got there. She was squatting in a corner, spraying the walls with diarrhea, while she vomited into her own lap, screaming, "Please help me." Justine had been helping with the tables, and she was at the bar when all of this kicked off. From where we were, she seemed to be fine at first. The second the medics entered the room, they froze. One of them got his radio, then tapped to the others as he pulled up his mask. They checked 2 people before I stepped away from the window and sat down on a countertop. Pete stayed glued to the window and waiting on a chance to get to his wife. After a few seconds, he started yelling and banging on the door. "Hey, where the fuck are you going?" Get back in there and help these people! I rushed over to the door in time to see the paramedics backing out of the room. Pete pushed past me and charged into the dining area yelling, "Justine, are you okay?" She got about halfway across the room before she started to vomit. Pete rushed over and grabbed her, then brought her back to the kitchen. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and backed away. "What are you doing? Dude, she's sick. Why are you bringing her in here?" Pete shot me an angry look as he helped Justine over to the counter. "She's my wife, Oscar. I wasn't going to just leave her in there. If you want to leave, leave. No one's stopping you. Call me an asshole if you want, but I didn't think twice about it." I headed for the back door. A chorus of loud screams from the dining area stopped me dead in my tracks. And before I could react, a man crashed through the door and collapsed on the floor. It looked like he was having a seizure. His body convulsed and twitched as he spewed a foul-smelling yellow fluid, before letting out a gurgling scream and going still. We stood there in shock for a few seconds. Then Pete grabbed Justine and we made a break for the back door. Rushing across the parking lot to Pete's Honda, we stopped. The two paramedics from earlier laying on the ground, dead. I guess I must have gotten distracted by the bodies on the sidewalk, because the next thing I know, I hear Pete yelling at me, "Oscar, get in the car right now, or I swear to God I'll leave you here." I jumped in the back seat and we hauled ass out of there. What the hell was that? What just happened? I was panicking. I had never seen anyone die before. My mind was racing, and I felt sick to my stomach. Pete wasn't much better off. Tears rolled down his face as we sped down the back streets headed for my apartments. Justine was slumped to the side of the passenger seat, with her face pressed against the window. He reached over and shook her with his free hand, trying to get her to wake up. "Justine, wake up. Justine, baby, please wake up." She took a deep, wheezing breath as she sat up in her seat and started coughing. "What happened? Where are we?" she groggily stammered out. Pete wiped away the tears and smiled a little. "We're dropping Oscar off at home. Then I'm going to take you to a hospital, baby. Just try and relax. Everything's going to be okay." She nodded her head and smiled for a second before she let out a burp. The car instantly filled with a stench of rotten eggs and ammonia. I gagged a little. "Holy shit, what did you eat?" I let down my window and got some fresh air. She burped 2 or 3 more times, and the smell got worse when they finally got me home. She had been passed out for a while, but I felt like that smell was in my skin. As soon as I got into my apartment, I hit the shower and scrubbed myself raw, trying to get rid of that reek. Around 3 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Pete. "Oscar, bro, listen to me, there's something..." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but it kept going to voicemail. I gave up after a while and tried getting some rest. I don't honestly remember going to sleep, but the next thing I know it's morning and I'm waking up. I got out of bed, grabbed a cigarette, and went outside for a smoke. I checked my phone, but there were no new messages. It was 8:30 in the morning, and something felt wrong. It was quiet. On any other day, there would be people all over the place. I shrugged it off and lit my smoke. I took a deep drag, and as I did, I noticed a dead bird laying on the ground. I started to look around and saw dozens of them. The entire courtyard was covered with dead birds. I glanced to my right at my neighbor's door. Usually his dog barks at anyone standing outside, but not a sound. I felt sick. Rushing back inside my apartment, I got dressed in a hurry, then raced outside and took off down the sidewalk to the parking lot. I hadn't gone 50 feet before I spotted a body. It was Mrs. Roby. She was face down on the ground next to the car. I looked around to see more bodies. There was a guy sitting by the mailboxes. The front of his shirt was covered in pus-colored vomit. I think his name was Eddie. But when I saw a kid laying in the grass next to his dead dog, my brain broke. Something about the look on his face tore my heart out. He looked so scared. There were still tears coming from his eyes. I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, but I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. I felt dizzy and confused. I couldn't focus, but when the sounds of sirens lit up the neighborhood, I snapped out of it. The sirens were close. Listening for them, I ran out to the street to try and flag them down. But when I got there, what I saw was mind-blowing. There was at least 7 more bodies. The only thing living on the street were the flies. Hundreds of them, swarming around the pools of foul-smelling vomit that accompanied each corpse. It was too much. I lost it. Turned around and ran full speed back to my apartment and locked myself in. 6 hours earlier, Pete ran every red light on the way to the hospital, while Justine drifted in and out of consciousness in the passenger seat. Every time she would wake up, she would burp uncontrollably, releasing an odor that was making Pete want to throw up. By the time they made it to the hospital, the place was a madhouse. There were people everywhere, and once they got to the emergency ward, things got worse. The waiting room was jammed. It was standing room only, and he stood there holding Justine up as long as he could, but he was getting tired. He did the only thing he could. He walked her through the crowd and laid her down on a stretcher he found in the hallway. After about 45 minutes, people started dying. All you could hear was retching and heaving, then fluid splattering across tile, followed by the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Then the place exploded into chaos. After a few minutes, Justine finally came to. She was slick with sweat, and her breath stunk like hell, but she was awake. Pete helped her up, and once he was sure she could stand on her own, they got out of there. When they were back in the car, he tried to call Oscar. "Oscar, bro, listen to me, there's something." His phone died before he could finish talking. Shit. He slipped his phone back in his pocket, started the car, and they peeled out of the parking lot, headed back to Oscar's place. Once they were on the road, Justine started talking. "Did you see her?" She giggled. "She brings the flies." She flashed a strange grin and started muttering something under her breath. Pete was getting more worried by the second. Not only was she clearly sick, but now she was talking crazy. He mashed his foot down and picked up speed as she rambled on. "There was an old lady that swallowed a fly," she whispered as she rocked back and forward in her seat. Out of nowhere, she let out a scream and grabbed the steering wheel, causing the car to swerve off the road and slam into a light pole. The airbags deployed, breaking Pete's nose and knocking him out during the crash. He wasn't sure what happened to Justine, but when he came to, she was gone. It took him a few minutes to get himself together and get out of the car, but once he was on his feet, he did what he could to find her. He searched for her till the sun rose and came up empty. He stopped for a second to catch his breath, then checked his watch. It was 8:15, and he was just a few blocks away from Oscar's place. If he moved fast, the walk would only take about 30 minutes. With any luck, he could get Oscar to help look for her. By the time he got to 10th Street and turned the corner, he saw Oscar running into the apartments. Meanwhile, I paced back and forward in my living room, chain smoking cigarettes and peeping out the window every few seconds. On the third time checking the window, I saw Pete with his broken nose and bloody face limping towards my front door. Holy fuck, this can't be happening. I closed the blinds, then rushed over to start pushing my couch in front of the door, just as Pete started knocking. "Open the goddamn door, you idiot! I just saw you looking out the window, let me in." I paused for a second. "What happened to you? Where's Justine?" After a brief conversation, I let him in. Pete told me everything that happened, and I agreed to help. I'm not exactly proud of what we did next. There was no way we were going to find her on foot, so we came up with the idea of taking Mrs. Roby's car. Since she was laying next to it, the odds were pretty good her keys would be in her purse. All we had to do was get them. The air was heavy with that horrible smell, drifting around on the breeze as we made our way over to Mrs. Roby's body. I hadn't really gotten close to any of the bodies at this point, so seeing Mrs. Roby up close was surreal. Her skin was slick and almost gray looking. She was lying in a pool of her own vomit, and when we turned her over, something equally funny and fucked up happened. Mrs. Roby voided her bowels in explosive fashion. Unfortunately for Pete, he happened to be standing in that general area. There was a wet pop when it happened, and Pete instantly let go of her legs. "Oh, what the fuck?" He retched and fought the urge to vomit. I couldn't help it, I laughed. She sprayed his forearms and chest, and I think it may have gotten into his beard. I laughed so hard I cried, while Pete gagged and heaved his guts out on the sidewalk. When we finally did get the keys, Pete cleaned himself up and we started searching for Justine. The streets were insane. Emergency crews were working overtime, trying to help people, and bodies were dropping left and right. Everywhere we went, people were dying. We drove around for hours looking anywhere we thought she might be with no luck. We were running low on gas, so we stopped to fill up. I don't know what happened, but I guess Pete saw someone he thought was Justine because he yelled, "Justine, wait!" And he took off running before I could react. I left the car and tried to catch up, but by the time I got down to the alley he went down, I didn't see him. I ran through the alley hearing Pete's voice. When I came to the other end of it, I saw him standing in the street looking confused. "Dude, what are you doing?" He was looking around frantically, trying to spot which way the person had gone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move and Pete took off in that direction. I ran after him, barely keeping up. When we made it to the next opening, what we saw stopped us both in our tracks. The woman Pete had been chasing wasn't Justine. She had a similar build and the hair color was close, but it wasn't her. The woman was standing in the alley holding a baby in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Please, you have to help her. She's not breathing." I didn't have to get close to see that the baby was dead, and by the look of it, she wasn't far behind. Her skin was already turning that sickly gray and she was dripping with sweat. The flies were buzzing in the air around her, waiting for her to hit the ground. I grabbed Pete by the arm just as he took a step forward. "What are you doing? That's not her. We can't help them, we need to go." The woman screamed again. "Please, you have to help." She stopped mid-sentence and started making a gurgling sound as she released her grip, sending the baby tumbling to the ground. Her body convulsed, and she heaved as she dropped to her knees, spewing that foul, yellowish fluid, then slumped over on her side, twitching for a few seconds before it was over. We both stood there stuck in the moment, not knowing what to say or do. I don't think we said a word the whole way back to the car. We drove all day, and when the sun went down, we drove some more. By the time it got dark, we had checked every other neighborhood in town and still no sign of Justine. We were passing through an intersection near Main Street when we got hit by a Ford F-150. The driver died behind the wheel with his foot on the gas. It happened so fast, all I really remember is the sound of an engine. The next thing I know, we were being pulled out of the car by some strangers who saw the wreck. I laid there staring up at the sky, listening to the sounds of helicopters and sirens echo through the city, while they pulled Pete from the car. It was hard to breathe. My whole body ached and my head was thumping something awful. After a few minutes, they laid Pete in the grass a few feet away from me. One of them was trying CPR, while the other was calling for help. That's the last thing I remember before I blacked out. When I came to, more paramedics were there. Pete was awake and screaming about Justine. He was so irate they had to sedate him before they had to put him in the ambulance and took him away. Before they could load me up, things went to shit. The paramedics that were dealing with the guy in the truck started getting sick. The EMTs that were helping me rushed over to help them, and they got sick. Within minutes, they were all on the ground dying. I lay there listening to the last gurgling gasps for air, and the gut-wrenching dry heaves of the unlucky few that hadn't passed on or passed out, hoping it would be over soon, if not for their sakes, for mine. I don't mean to sound insensitive, but it was driving me crazy. I remember at one point yelling over to one of them, "Just shut up. Shut the fuck up." Not my proudest moment, but I couldn't take it anymore. Time passed so slowly once the street got quiet. I struggled for God knows how long, until I was able to stand on my feet. Once I did, I looted the ambulance for pain meds and crutches, then started my long trip home. I'll spare you the trip because honestly nothing happened. I hobbled home, nobody helped, and that was that. It's been a few days since that happened, but late last night, Justine showed up at my apartment. I didn't mean to kill her. I thought if she saw the gun she would go away, but she was acting so crazy. She was screaming about flies, and when she attacked me I just reacted. Everything happened so fast. There was a loud bang, and before I knew it, she was on the ground screaming, "Why can't you see her?" till she gasped her last breath. Pete showed up this morning. I should have known he wouldn't be far behind her. When he saw her body on my floor, he attacked me. I didn't stand a chance against that rage. He beat the hell out of me. In his anger, he didn't see the gun until it was too late. I jammed the barrel under his chin and fired at the same time, blowing the roof of his skull out before he slumped over dead. My two closest friends were now both laying on the floor on my living room. I sat across the room staring at their lifeless bodies for a long time. My hands were trembling, and I couldn't stop crying. There was no living with what I'd just done. Sobbing uncontrollably, I put the gun in my mouth and pulled the trigger.